shit.
That's what I'm talking about.
Wait.
Okay, now, from the beginning.
Welcome to BS, Beyond Stereotypes, a podcast about lawyers using their authentic voices to change the world.
The way forward is not just throwing data and facts at people, and because all that stuff can get twisted. It's if you know my heart and you get to know me, like we're going to build something together. And to me, that's the path forward on this work. And that's sort of something I've always seen and known to work is when we listen, when we learn from each other, when we're humble, when we don't feel like we're entitled, and there's a lot of forces acting that are actively trying to stop us from building connections. Like that's the other thing. I think when, white folks or people of a lot of privilege feel like this work isn't about them, I oftentimes say, well, maybe you don't feel it in like if at a high level, that equity is not going to improve your life, but you're being kept out of knowing people. You're being kept away from people, and you're not actually having all the choices you think you have, because these systems of oppression, whether it's sexism or racism or homophobia, anti-Semitism, all these things, they hurt all of us, because we stop building community with people because we've been trained to only build community with certain groups because we're scared of others. And man, the path forward to me with all this is to build meaningful connections, listen to each other, but hold people accountable. And that's something that doesn't happen a lot.
Welcome to BS, Beyond Stereotypes. I'm your host, Merle Vaughn. Here to BS with me today is Mindy Gulati, whose story I find fascinating and who will no doubt inspire all of you to embrace your authenticity. Hey, Mindy, how are you?
Doing well. Great to be here with you.
Oh, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. I'm sure there's tons of other things you could be doing, but we got you for an hour, so I'm happy.
Yeah, excited to be here. No better place than hanging out with you. So I'm excited.
Cool. So, as you know, and as the people who generally listen to the podcast know, the first thing that I'll do is kind of give a brief bio. I don't give a long bio because everybody is Googleable these days, and you can look people up on LinkedIn or Google them and find out more about them. But I will let people know that you, Mindy, are the founder and CEO of Fundamental Advisory. You went to University of Utah undergrad and received your JD in San Diego from the Thomas Jefferson Law School. After graduating from law school, you were a public defender, which I find very interesting, in San Diego for about 3 years. And then it looks like you decided to hang out your own shingle and have your own practice for about 6 years before starting your DEI consulting firm, and you've been doing that for about 8 years. And you left the great state of California to go to Texas at some point, and you're currently in Austin. So is that accurate? If it's not, please correct it. And if I missed anything, please fill in the gap.
Nope, that sounds exactly right. So, and I've been in Austin for almost 11 years now.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you actually had your own practice in Austin before becoming a consultant.
Yeah, I was mostly doing work still in California. So not too much work in Austin. Austin is a different environment for criminal defense attorneys, and it just didn't seem like an environment I wanted to spend my time and energy in. So I was still doing some cases in California, kind of commuting back and forth prior to opening my practice.
Okay. And so, what I like to start with is kind of if you would kind of take us through your personal story. Everybody has a story and you can't look at them and tell what that story is. Hence, getting beyond stereotypes. But so if you would help us with your personal story, even and if you feel comfortable, kind of give us an idea of where you're from, who raised you, what influence they had on, your journey, as well as where you are now and who you are now. and basically, kind of who helped you become the person you are.
Yeah. Well, it's a great question, and I am a good storyteller. So stop me if it gets too long. But
Okay.
I was born and raised in northern Utah. I was born in a city called Ogden, Utah,
Hmm.
and grew up in Layton, Utah. So this is north of Salt Lake City, kind of by the foothills of the mountains. And I was born to very young parents who I think did the best they could, but I spent a lot of time in my especially well, my whole childhood with my grandparents. And
Hmm.
so my grandparents were really critical in my upbringing. I spent a lot of time at their house, sort of every day after school. Spent a lot of time, as a young child with them every day, and then always going there after school. I actually went to my grandparents after school all the way through high school because I loved them and they were kind of my best friends. And so I
Wow.
liked going there after school, even though I was driving and able to go home if I wanted to. I always went to their house after school. It was just a really comfortable place for me. Um, so my mom and dad were teenagers when they had me, and I think that there's a lot that goes into having a child when you're a teenager, and they got divorced when I was about 1 year old. So I never
Mhm.
really grew up or lived with my dad. And so, I think I had a lot of kind of tumultuous up and down with parents, but my grandparents were always really, really steady. And that's not to say that, my mom did a lot for me, and she was there in as much as she could. But my grandparents are really just this place where I could kind of just be who I was.
Mhm.
And they were really dynamic people. And I'm talking about my maternal grandparents. I did spend a lot of time with my paternal grandparents, but my grandpa passed away when I was like 10, and my grandma passed away when I was 12. And so I didn't spend the same amount of time with them or have necessarily the exact same connection, but they were still important to me. But my grandpa Neil, I think it was as I've gotten older and just continued to reflect on him, he was really a vital person in kind of who I am today, for better or for worse, right? Like he had a very intense work ethic, which I have today, right? He was born in Idaho. He was a rancher, farmer, kind of one of the people that you wake up as soon as the sun comes out and you work all day, and you're kind of falling asleep on the couch because you've worked such a hard day. And so
Mhm.
I grew up around that. But the thing I took away from my grandpa a lot is he was rowdy, which I would consider myself rowdy if anyone's ever met me.
Uh-huh.
And he was real direct, but man, he like loved you so much. He loved everybody, and he just would do anything for you. And but he was really principled too. Like, and that's where I think between him, my grandma, and my mom and my aunt, I grew up in an unusual way for a white family, I would say, because I didn't I didn't grow up in a family where there were racists, there were people who were biased. Like, my family of white folks from Utah who were not college educated was really like very not just open-minded, but I would say active in civil rights. And
Mhm.
my grandpa was a really principled person. So, him and his brother, one of the kind of famous stories in our family is he and his younger brother, who was a farmer, lived like a couple miles from us and had a big farm. And we used to go ride horses over there and everything. He and my grandpa got in a fight that lasted for years because of Muhammad Ali changing his name. And my uncle like disagreeing with it, my grandpa supporting Muhammad Ali. And I don't think they talked for a couple years because my grandpa
Wow.
was so like, we should be supporting this person. And so I kind of learned that from him. And just, realizing the power that we had. Also my grandpa, his mom, killed herself when he was very young, when he was about 12.
Mm.
And it was like haunting to him. And it was interesting because I was always like really intrigued about her. There was like one picture that he had in his room of her, and it was like, it was kind of scary to me because she was wearing something around her neck that almost looked like a rope, and she had hung herself.
Oh, wow.
That's how she killed herself. And I always looked at the picture and I just wanted to know more, but he had a really hard time talking about her. But in some of the conversations I had with him and my grandma, she was raising kids in the height of the Great Depression, and she had just had a child, maybe 6 weeks old, and the pressure of being a woman and being poor, and it was 19, I think 34 when she killed herself. She just couldn't handle it. And she, she when my grandpa found her,
Mm.
he, discovered, it really impacted him of knowing sort of like what women have to go through.
Mm.
And I remember as a kid him telling me things like, you got to stand up for people's rights, and like, and he was a feminist. And my grandpa only went to school till 7th or 8th grade.
Mhm.
He had a pretty traumatic childhood after his mom died, and he worked hard, and but he wasn't what you would call like educated. But man, he was fierce on civil rights and feminism and supporting women. And my grandma was a fierce feminist. And, she was also from Idaho. And, she went to school, went to high school and had good jobs, and was a working woman. And he always supported her. And he just thought she was the most incredible person. And so, I was being raised by people who were socially conscious and aware, which I think in northern Utah, amongst
Mm.
like white communities,
Right.
that really wasn't like going on. And then my mom and my aunt, who were identical twins, and my mom was really young when she had me, but they were very active in Democratic politics and the Democratic Party. And they were both young, and had kids when they were young. But my mom was very much in the civil rights movement, in the pro-choice movement. And so I grew up around activism and civic engagement. And really sort of the messaging in my upbringing was, you know, these problems were caused by white folks, racism, systems of oppression, all of the, segregation and Jim Crow and redlining, and you have to do something about it. Like it was seen as like our responsibility. And I really remember, I don't know how old I was, but the Eye on the Prize PBS special
Yeah.
came out sometime when I was in elementary school. I'm 44, by the way, born in 79. But I was in elementary school and I'd watch that with my mom. And, I would just be like shocked at, what I was seeing. And she would talk to me about it. And there was no questions off limits. There was no hiding it. And it was just like, look at how atrocious this is. And we have to, we made this mess and we got to clean it up, meaning we white people made this mess. And it's not just the responsibility of Black folks to be out there in the streets. Like we have to be out there with them. And so that was really like the sort of the ethical center that I was raised with. And so it's interesting because I get asked a lot. I even had somebody bill me on a podcast once of like, talking about like overcoming, racism as a white person in your family. And I was like, no, that's like not my family. And I'm not saying that they didn't have, implicit biases like everybody does, but they were like what I would call like active anti-racists. And that was just what I grew up in. So I obviously grew up in an all white community. I mean, Utah is funny because it's like the people are white, the snow is white, like everything's white. It's just like it's like there's not a lot else going on. But I felt like my family, I had my aunt had married a Latino man, so my cousins were half white, half Latino. We had as much diversity as you can get in Utah in our friend group, in the people we played sports with, in the friends I had. I tended to gravitate to those groups. And Utah has a really odd dynamic in that Utah is probably the only place I've ever been where there's not as much like racial segregation as there is religious segregation.
Right. I was going to
So
ask about that. Yeah.
I grew up in a very Mormon part of Utah, and we were not Mormon. And if you want a funny story, I'll tell you a story about my family in a minute on the Mormon front. But we weren't Mormon. My mom was also divorced, which is a big no-no. And what it's interesting in Utah because when you enter into junior high, you kind of that's where like the segregation begins. So
Hmm.
in elementary school, you're kind of with people, and the little kids know if they're Mormon or not, if people go to church or not, but it's not as pronounced. And when you get into seventh grade, which is junior high in Utah, there's something called seminary, which is actually church during school, and it
Hmm.
still goes on. And there's a whole entire a church on school grounds that the Mormon kids go for something called seminary class. And so all of a sudden, when you enter seventh grade, it's like very aware of who's Mormon and who's not. And it kind of already was.
But you
By the
didn't
way,
have to, so the non-Mormons weren't,
yes.
or didn't participate in that?
Yeah, yeah. So it was interesting because all of a sudden it was like we called us the non-Mormons. So in Utah, it's like the Mormons and the non-Mormons. It's like and I mean, my family still lives there, and my nieces and nephews go to school there, and my cousins and things, and so there's still this like Mormon or non-Mormon once you get to middle school, and so all of the non-Mormons form sort of their group, and that is the most diverse group in the school, right? You had like
Hmm.
if you watch teenage movies, there's all those like movies of like the jocks, the cowboys, the
Right. The
stoners, the
cafeteria
skateboarders.
groups.
Yeah. And in Utah, it's more like the Mormons and the non-Mormons. And then with each subset, there's like, but like all the non-Mormons, you could have cowboy friends, you could have, choir friends, you kind of all came together because you were a small group. And so,
Hmm.
you know, I think some of my childhood experiences of feeling like an outsider
Hmm.
um definitely made up how I feel or how I've like lived my life, because it wasn't just my family, which is obviously your family's important, but I really felt different when I was growing up because I mean I
Hmm.
had friends that weren't allowed to come to my house because my mom was divorced. And
Wow.
they would say like, we can't go to your house because your mom lives in sin because her boyfriend lived with us. And so, there was that happened a lot. I mean, I can count on my hand at least 6 kids. I could name them today: Katie, Trudy, Christine, right? Like told me like, we can't come to your house, like, because your mom is, living in sin. And so I felt, growing up in Utah, obviously having, white privilege and other privileges, but I was also a non-Mormon. And I sort of I never wanted to be a Mormon. I never wanted to fit in, actually. Like I think I was different than a lot of people because some of my friends who weren't Mormon would try to toe the line a bit, sometimes go to church with their friends, dress modestly, like not speak their minds.
Hmm.
I was never like that.
Yeah,
So,
so they would shrink basically. I mean,
yes, they would shrink.
I can totally relate to that because I grew up in a very the kind of very opposite, polar opposite situation. I grew up in Compton, which by the time I was around the age you're talking about was all black.
Mhm.
And you had the same kind of situation, like, where, and I felt like an outsider because I, you know, dressed a certain way, or my hair was a certain way, or I wanted to study, or
Mhm.
those kind of things, and you feel ostracized. And but then so you have a choice. You either fit in, go along to get along and kind of shrink so that you don't cause any attention, or you just say screw it, I am who I am,
Yeah.
and I'll just have to deal with the consequences, which is what I did. And the consequences was being bullied, you
Mm.
know
Mm.
uh, um but so
I think for me, like the consequences for me was, and I'm a pretty deep introspective person, so I've actually done a pretty deep dive with some of my like childhood friends and high school friends about like what were their perceptions of me, because I didn't get bullied, but because I stepped into like, this is who I am, and sort of like, fuck y'all, like,
Hmm.
this is who I am. And but it was like I didn't have the high school experiences because I was like rowdy. I think I gave off a vibe of, you know,
Don't mess with her.
don't mess with me. And actually one of my, just like 2 summers ago, I was in Utah, and one of my best friends from middle school and high school, his name's Jeff. I said, like, what did you think about me in high school? Like, what was I like to you? And he said, you were the most confident person I'd ever met, but you were, and people were really intimidated by you because you were like the only person who just was like super honest and transparent, and you were who you were. You dressed how you dressed. You didn't fit into one box. You just were who you were. But I think the cost of that was, like, I didn't go to many like high school dances. Like,
Yep.
I wasn't like attractive to people. Like, I wasn't, and I don't think I was really that happy. And that wasn't really because of living in my authenticity. I had a rough like experience of home life. And so I just wasn't happy. Like, I wasn't
Right.
carefree as a kid. I was never carefree as a kid.
Right.
And I was not a carefree teenager. But, when Jeff told me that he said I was the most confident person he'd ever met, it was interesting because I don't know that I would have said that about myself, but I actually really was. I was just who I was. Like,
Right.
I
Well,
enjoyed the
I
things
get
I
that
did.
same,
Yeah.
yeah, I get that same thing where people say, well, you always knew who you were and you were super
Hmm.
confident. And I'm like, really? Because I was kind of scared, but I wasn't so scared that I was gonna be
Hmm.
somebody different, you
Hmm.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. So you went to college in Utah. Were you the first person in your family to go to college?
Yeah. Yeah. And my dad had went to college, but I didn't have much contact with my dad. So in my sort of family of, or of upbringing, I was, and um, it was a really new experience. It was a really different world to go into, but it was where I knew I would always end up. So I think the one thing my mom did really well was just, it was like, you are going to go to college. Like, there's
Right.
not a, and I was really a smart kid, and I loved school. I was a high achiever, again, kind of for mixed reasons, like not all positive, but I was a high achiever. And so college was definitely where I was going to go. But it was different, because I didn't have a lot of people to go talk to it about. And I just sort of went, and I moved out when I was 17,
Hmm.
and went to college, and sort of had to, I was really young, to be in that position. I started school when I was young. And so I was a young, freshman in college.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, we have similarities. I went when I was 16. So
Mm, mm, mm-hmm.
yeah, so it's funny how it's that's very interesting. So then how did you decide to go to law school?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think I always knew I would go to law school. So I'll tell you about this moment where sort of all the pieces came together. It actually was in seventh grade English class, and it was during the Bill Clinton campaign. So I'll like never forget this. This is like 1992. He's running for president. I was like in love with like James Carville, and like the
Hmm.
whole the
Hmm.
whole gang of the Bill Clinton era. And Bill Clinton was facing a lot of pressure for like affairs and sort of all these things. And I remember I said to myself, like, okay, Mindy, like, you're gonna do big things. You're gonna go to law school. So I like made my mind up then. But I also said to myself, like, I am going to set my life up where nobody can like basically fuck with me.
Yeah.
Meaning, I am going to live a life of like honesty and ethics and no skeletons in the closet. You can investigate me. And
All right.
I mean, I made that decision when I was 12. And no lie. I
Wow.
mean, I was just like, I'm gonna be untouchable. Like, I'm gonna, and I was the kind of kid, like, I wouldn't, if I was at a party that didn't seem like it was going well, I'm out, right? I just
Right.
was I wanted to do big things. And I was watching Bill Clinton, and we were watching some clip in English class, and I was like, man, he should have done better. Like
Right.
he should have
Right.
chose better, because
Right.
I really liked him. He was so dynamic, and as a kid, it was like really inspiring to see someone young in that position and that. But I think I always knew I'd go to law school. I went to college. And immediately was like, I'm going to do political science. I got interested in women's studies, is what it was called at the time. I think it changed to gender studies now, but feminist theory. I took every class I could on like Black history, Black studies, and really dove headfirst into understanding like an intersectional framework for all the things that I wanted to do, because I really wanted to do racial justice work. I mean, and that's
Mhm.
like from childhood. And so it
Mhm.
seemed to me like political science and feminist theory were like important. And I didn't have a fun college experience because I worked full time. So I just worked full time. I worked 40 to 50 hours a week, and I went to school. I didn't have time for a lot of other things. And so law school was really the first time I got to be, I feel like I was like the most relaxed of my life, which is not what most people would say about law school, but it was the first time in my life I didn't have to work.
Okay.
I got my first job when I was 14 cleaning office buildings. So
Mm.
I have always worked. And then I get to law school and it's like, oh, I don't have a job. I just get to go to school. Like this is incredible.
Right.
So yeah, so that was sort of the journey. And I went to law school to do racial justice, and I didn't know, I think naively, I was just like, oh, I'll be a civil rights lawyer. I didn't even know what that meant because no one in my family were lawyers. I didn't know a
Right.
lawyer. I like literally didn't know a lawyer until I went to law school. I never met a lawyer. I had no contact with lawyers. I didn't do internships in college because I had to work. So I worked at UPS and Costco. And so my first experience with lawyers was my first day of class, like walking in and being
Mhm.
like, oh, wow, this is what it is.
Mhm.
And so that was sort of the journey to get to law school. Was kind of one I put my attention to really when I was very young. So
So when you talk about, because this episode actually is gonna air during Women's History Month.
mhm,
When you talk about being a feminist, and
mhm.
your grandfather was a feminist, I've never really quite heard anybody say what that really means. What does that mean to you, and having studied feminism?
So to me, it is leveraging sort of my position, power, and privilege to advance the rights of women. And I'm an intersectional feminist, so I don't separate women's rights from racial equity or racial justice.
Mhm.
But feminism, sort of as I was growing up, was really imparted to me that we have to actively and constantly be fighting for women to have equity and equality. And so I think feminism for me is a way of living in which my choices, the work I do, the people I associate with, where I spend my time, where I put my money and my efforts, are going to be for the advancement of women, particularly um, marginalized women, Black and brown, Asian, indigenous women. And so that's sort of what feminism is to me. And every day you have a choice to act in a feminist manner, act in a racially just manner. And to me, it's pretty obvious, like the choices that you make every day. I have kids, so I raise them with this ethic. And so whether it's from friend groups or where I put my money or how I raise my kids, it's all in an effort to, keep passing the baton to future generations and all the work that I touch to hopefully that one day, you know, we realize this place of, equity and justice.
And so you said the word choice, and I think that is that's what has clearly been under attack for a long time, but definitely recently,
Hmm.
this idea that women or anybody, should have choices.
Hmm.
And talk to me about the current climate, but also, and then how is it, how's that going in, where you are in Texas right now? Because I find that fascinating.
Well, where we're going is not great. I'll tell you a story to
Hmm.
convey how things are going. So I am 44. I have been going to this is maybe TMI, but it's all right. people can live through TMI. I've been going to the gynecologist since I was 14 years old, right? So 30 years of this. You go to the gynecologist, as all women know, and maybe some men who go with their wives or spouses or sisters or kids. You go in, you take a urine test, they give you a urine test, you get your exam. So this, last year, so this was in 2020, it was right after Dobbs. So I guess that was 2022. 23. So like I go to my normal annual exam and I walk in, and I have had ovarian cysts before, and I was having a similar feeling. So I walk in, I'm going for my annual exam. I'm going to tell the doctor about some, pain I'm having and see if we can get an ultrasound for ovarian cysts. So I go in, no urine test. First time in my life that I haven't had a urine test at an OBGYN. So I'm like, this is weird. So I just use the restroom and I go in. Doctor comes in, does the pap smear, and I say, I'm having some pain. I've had ovarian cysts. Like, I feel like it's kind of the same pain. So is there any way we can you can examine that? Can I get an ultrasound? Because the last time I had them a couple of years ago, they just gave me ultrasound right there. Said, yep, you got a few. A couple of them are too big, so we're going to do a quick surgery. Like, that's how it was.
Right.
Well, this doctor says to me, we don't do ultrasounds anymore here. You don't do ultrasounds in an OBGYN office? No.
What?
And I said, well, I'm like having the same pain I had like 3 years ago when I had these. And she said, do you think you could be pregnant? And I said, well, I don't think so, but I don't think it's like, I can't say 100% I'm not, but I'd say 99.9.
Right.
And she said, well, what I want you to do is I would like you to go next door to the grocery store and buy a pregnancy test.
Wow.
And because some of your symptoms that you're telling me could be an ectopic pregnancy. So I immediately
and she didn't want to touch it. She didn't want to have anything to do with it.
So so I start to panic because, as some people may know, if you have an ectopic pregnancy, it can be fatal for you. So I leave the doctor and go next door to a grocery store called HEB. And I call my husband and I said, Samir, and I was bawling. I said, look, something weird is going down. What I'm going to need you to do is if I call you back, I need you to book me a ticket. And I was actually going to book a ticket to LA and come see y'all at Walala.
Right.
I was like, because I'm going to have to go get an abortion. If I have an ectopic pregnancy, I got to leave the state. Right. And I go to HEB like I'm a criminal and I use cash. And I pay for it because I was a criminal defense attorney, so I know to use cash in certain situations. I used cash. I brought a pregnancy test like I'm a criminal, and I go in and I take it. And the whole time I'm waiting for the results, I'm like bawling because I'm thinking, I can't get healthcare here. I'm going to have to hop on a plane. Now, I wasn't pregnant, and I just had to live with the pain of the cyst. I never went back to the doctor. But I'm savvy, right? And I have access, and I could have hopped on a plane and flown to LA, and I could have, I had all those resources. And I'm like, what if a woman goes in there or a young girl and she doesn't know what the doctor's insinuating? Because the doctor is basically like, go buy a pregnancy test, wink, wink. And it's catastrophic what's happening. And that's my mini story that and so women no longer get health care here. Like, we don't get health. I did not get health care. I was told to go to a grocery store and figure it out on my own. And so for all the people who supported the overturning of Roe v. Wade, like, good luck is all I'm going to say to you, because we're all in a really bad situation. I don't care if you're a 44-year-old mom like me who just has some ovarian cysts, we're in trouble, because like, healthcare no longer exists in the way it did for women in Texas and most of these states that are outlawing this. So this is not just something for women who need an abortion. Like, if I would have had an ectopic pregnancy, I could have not even survived getting to LA, right? So that tells you a little bit about the state of affairs. And I have, like I said, my case is minuscule compared to what's really going on. And we're in the thick of it. And so for everybody who thinks feminism is unnecessary or fighting for women's rights are unnecessary, like you better dust off your protest boots, because we're back. Like, we're about to continue to have this onslaught. And I have a little I have a girl, she's 10 years old, and I don't even know. I don't know what to do because I've built a life here. There's a lot of things I really love about Texas. I'm very invested in telling the true narrative of Texas, that Texas is not just white male Republican cowboys. It is the most
Mhm.
diverse state. It is beautiful. It is dynamic. I mean, Houston itself is one of the most diverse cities in the world.
Right.
And you know, I want that story to be told, but it's also the politics are very oppressive.
Well, and when I think about the politics, when you really think about, who is is yelling the loudest, it's not very many people.
No.
It's just a handful of folks, who are very loud, and the people who don't feel this way are quiet, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so, that's what is really concerning, because even what you're talking about with feminism and the lack of healthcare and choice and all that, it still kind of comes back to a racial element,
Hmm. Hmm.
because
For
just
sure.
like today I saw, with the whole Alabama thing, there was a politician who was saying, well, we need to have more kids. Yeah, I agree with that, because we need to have more kids. And the reporter was like, no, don't you understand that this is going to mean that fewer people can have kids?
Hmm.
And he didn't even know that.
Yeah.
Right? And so you have people who don't even understand what's on, and don't understand the laws, don't understand um, the effects, making these policies. And I read something that you said on LinkedIn recently, and you called it intellectually dishonest, and that really resonated with me, but I wasn't sure. I know
Hmm.
kind of how it hit me, but I'd
Hmm.
love for you to expand on what does that mean.
Yeah. So my perspective on a lot of these sort of, issues like access to abortion, diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism, this alleged, this fake controversy over being woke, whatever it is. I
Right.
mean, if you really look at the arguments that are being made against, um, access, equality, diversity, inclusion, equity, they're just intellectually dishonest. They're not saying that they're not truthful in what they're actually trying to do. And when you say things like you have two white male billionaires out here putting on in a propaganda machine saying that DEI must die, or DEI is racist. It's just dishonest. It's like, I don't know how else to say it. Like, you're just lying. Like, and if you want to have an honest debate with me, like, I'll debate anybody, anytime, any day. But I'm not going to, like, I don't fight over things that are not true. I'm not going to sit down and have a podcast argument with someone whether the earth is round, or whether
Right.
the sun rises in the morning. Like, we're not arguing about that. Like, if you came to me and said, no, Mindy, the sun does not rise in the morning, I'm going to say you're intellectually dishonest. Like, no. Now come to me with another debate. So and in my work, I work with people who are opposed to equity efforts. And I tell them, I'm like, I'm okay with you having that posture so that we can have an argument, or we can have a discussion, or I can help move you to a place where you understand why it's important and equity really is for everyone. But I'm not gonna argue things that are not true, because it's just not. It's a waste of my time, right? I got too many things to accomplish. And in Texas, our governor, has been on this, and he's been, pushing this anti DEI, and it's just intellectually dishonest. And when you say that white folks are being, discriminated against and being treated in a racist way because of DEI, it's just not true. So
Right.
I don't. You can argue with me that you don't think we should have equity. If you want to argue with me, like, it'll just expose you. Like, I can't imagine being so weak of a human that you don't want people to have fairness and access, or
Right.
that you don't want people to be included. I'm like, that's called a values conflict. And we're never going to come together, because I fundamentally believe that everybody should have access to what they need to thrive in life. That does not mean handing people things. It does not mean people have to work hard. But I don't believe that we should leave people on the side of the road to suffer. And I certainly don't believe that white folks have no responsibility currently for racism that happened in the past. Like, it's not like a lot of white folks would be like, well, I didn't do that. It's fine. Congratulations. Like, let me give you a pin that you didn't do that. But you are currently benefiting from the system.
From the
It is
people who did do it.
from the
Right.
people who did do that. So we are obligated as white people to push back on these racist systems, these systems of oppression. And I mean, I told you, I wake up every day. I wake up every day. How am I going to further racial justice and equity? And you can do it in small ways. Like, I just read this fantastic book called Viral Justice. And it's about these micro ways that you can create like racial justice. It doesn't have to be a takedown of the whole system, which is the eventual goal. But you can, every day you make a choice of how you're going to engage in society, from where you live to how you eat to where you send your kids to school to what you teach your kids. And I mean, I think it's mind blowing to me, the dishonesty people have in saying like, well, I don't do these things, so I'm not responsible. You know, white folks have benefited for hundreds of years from these oppressive systems. Men have benefited from these oppressive systems. In law, you know, I do a lot of work with law firms. I do a lot of consulting with law firms. The inequities in law firms and in partnerships of law firms is mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm.
And to say that that's just a natural course of things, or that nobody continues to benefit from this, yes, you do continue to benefit from it, because there's no way that these numbers of you know, pay and position and partnerships for women and Black and brown folks, people of color, should be where they are if things were fair. They're not fair.
Well, and what's interesting about that too, and every time I get interviewed about this, I say it, but it hasn't made print yet. Everything else makes print, but this doesn't, is when you talk about the numbers, you mentioned the numbers. So when you talk about partnerships, right, there are fewer than 4% of partners in big firms. You know, the AmLaw 200 are Black, right? Fewer than 4%. And this whole thing that has controversy that has arisen, where these couple of people are attacking firms who want to try to promote equity. They're saying that it's reverse discrimination or whether. And my question is, it's 4%. So what do you want it to be? Do you want it to be zero? Is that, what is the goal? Is the goal zero?
Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you this, like this is where, like, I mean, and I'll take on this question every day of my life. And it just happened to me. I was presenting at an engineering conference for a national engineering organization. And I had like introduced myself that I grew up in Utah, kind of thing. So a guy comes up to me afterwards, waits in a long, long line to see me. And he's like, "Oh, I'm from Ogden." And, you know, we have that in common. And he goes, I just want to tell you my son's story. And he said he applied to the University of Utah Medical School. And I know he didn't get in because he's white. And they're looking for diversity. And, you know, I know he didn't. And I just said, how do you know that that spot was for him? Why is he entitled to that spot?
Right.
Like, it's not your spot. I know the world has told you that's your spot, but it is not your spot. And part of the intellectual dishonesty is these folks are, if they were honest, they'd be like, man, we're scared we are not competent enough to compete. We are scared that people are coming for our jobs because they're better than us, right? The best and the brightest do not run this country, do not run partnerships, do not run a lot of companies. If you read the book Caste by Elizabeth Wilkerson, like, we don't have the alpha running the pack right now because systems and structures have kept out the best and the brightest, right? Like, so So no, how do you know that that seat's how do you know? And I told her, I said, how do you know he was supposed to get that? How do you know the other kids' grades, academics, backgrounds, experiences, volunteer? You don't know any of it. You know
But
your
you know
son,
what?
and your
A
son's
good
great. That's fantastic for your son that he's so smart. But like, he's not entitled to that.
Well,
And
and the other question is, why are you only questioning that spot? Why
yes,
are you not questioning
questioning the
all
other
those
50 spots.
spots? Exactly.
The other 50 spots that went to white men. Like,
Right.
why is it the one
Why
black
wasn't
guy
one
who
of
you're
right?
questioning?
Why wasn't one of those
Yeah,
his son's spot?
exactly. And that's the entitlement that, I mean, it runs rampant. And again, like, I grew up white. I'm white. It's not going to change. I know what white people say to each other, because I often found
Well, it's
myself
like
in.
being a fly on the wall,
It's
right?
like
I
a
mean, I
fly on the
love to be
wall, right?
a fly on
Like,
the wall.
you look at me, I'm 4'11", I got light hair, I'm like unassuming, right? So people will say things, and I've had comments made a lot to me, and I mean, unfortunately for them, they have to live with the consequences when I talk to them about what they just said. But it's like, you're not entitled to anything. And one thing, like, I've taught my kids is, I've said, you're not entitled to a convenient life. Like,
Mm.
you're just not entitled to it. Like, life can be hard and you don't get what you want all the time, and it's not always convenient. And I think that we have to change this feeling that, like, we deserve something because we work hard. Not always, right? And the other thing that I told this guy is, I said, because I really challenged him, and I said, the other thing I want you to be thinking about is that as Utah becomes more diverse, and there is a need for cultural competency for certain doctors and certain hospitals, part of someone's background and culture is a skill. So
Mhm.
I'm tired of this whole, like, not qualified and we should just be skill-based hiring. I'm like, the fact that someone's culturally Chinese or speaks Chinese actually is a relevant skill and qualification. So
Mhm.
it's not taking into consideration their race. It's saying this person's skilled to perhaps work in a community where we need more doctors that speak Chinese, right? So diversity is a skill. Your identity traits can be a skill. If
Well,
you're
and the
if you're
cultural,
yeah,
your cultural
your
experience
cultural
and
experience.
understanding how people see things differently because of culture, like you say, is a skill
It's
that
a skill.
other people don't have.
Yeah. And, I was working with an organization that does CPS investigations. And I do some training for them. And, they need to hire more CPS investigators that are culturally um, uh, competent and aware and tied to certain communities that they're investigating.
What's
Because
CPS? What does CPS stand for?
Children Protective
Oh,
Services.
okay. Uh-huh.
So these are the people who investigate child abuse cases. So it's very hard to have, like, a white woman go investigate and try to get information from a family that maybe is from, like, Sudan, for example, and to
Mhm.
understand cultural dynamics and to build trust. Not that she necessarily can't, but it'd be nice if we hired somebody on the staff who had a background and who was either Sudanese or who spoke the language, or someone from a surrounding region who understood the cultural lens, so that we can understand how to protect those families better, how to get them to talk to us, how to get them to come up with their case plan. And so our experiences, our cultures, our language, they're a skill. And so I'm also kind of tired of trying to pretend like your identity isn't a big portion of why you're skilled for a job. It's not just what you can write on a resume. There's a lot of other components to that, right?
Right. Well, and I mean, even for example, like I have an undergraduate marketing degree. And so, I look at things when I see things, especially visually, I just wonder, a lot of times I'm just shaking my head, wondering, did they not have any people of color or diversity or whatever in that marketing department who could point out to them that, yeah, this is might be true and accurate, but what effect is that photo gonna have on the general public? Is this really what you want to portray, um, and could you present in a more diverse way, because we have a very diverse society, and it's, people want to say, well, you shouldn't look at color and you should, but everybody wants to see representation.
Hmm. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, everybody wants to see and the idea that, you know, that people aren't thinking, like, in professional ways, or not thinking, is this representative? How are we portraying our
Hmm.
company or whatever, by putting this out there? Who are we excluding?
Hmm. Hmm.
Because you don't have to exclude people, but
No.
you have to actually be thinking, is this exclusionary in some way?
Yeah. And like I say, everyone gets a choice every day. So I always encourage people, like, think of your choices. Where do you spend your time? What's the community you're building, right? Um and we get a choice of the communities we build and who we spend our time with and who we learn from. I always challenge people, like, how many authors are you reading right now, or that are authors that have a different identity than you?
Mhm.
Are you filling your kids' bookshelves with a diversity in author and perspective? Like, and these are just many choices. Again, that book Viral Justice is so good because,
I'm going to check it out.
oh God, it's amazing. I love it. 5 stars. It is because it's about, like, these, when you build connection and community, like, that's really how we transform the world. Because in the work that I do and all the conversations that I have, I can tell you the path forward is to build relationships with people. The
Yeah.
path forward with that guy who felt like his son was so harmed was not me reading him stats, it was listening to him. And
Mhm.
and I really listened to him and building a connection with him. We're both from Utah, both born in Ogden, listening to him, but holding him accountable and giving him my card and saying, hey, if you want to reach out, like, let's chat more. Because that's the way forward. The way forward is not just throwing data and facts at people, and because all that stuff can get twisted. It's, if you know my heart and you get to know me, like, we're going to build something together. And I mean, to me, that's the path forward on this work. And that's sort of something I've always seen and known to work, is when we listen, when we learn from each other, when we're humble, when we don't feel like we're entitled, and there's a lot of forces that are actively trying to stop us from building connections. Like, that's the other thing. I think when, white folks or people of a lot of privilege feel like this work isn't about them, I oftentimes say, well, maybe you don't feel it in, like, if at a high level, that equity is not going to improve your life, but you're being kept out of knowing people. You're being kept
Mhm.
away from people, and you're not actually having all the choices you think you have, because these systems of oppression, whether it's sexism or racism or homophobia, anti-Semitism, all these things, they hurt all of us, you know, because we stop building community with people because we've been trained to only build community with certain groups because we're scared of others. And man, the path forward to me with all this is to build meaningful connections, listen to each other, but hold people accountable. And that's something that doesn't happen a lot.
Well, and do you think that, because, I've said this before, I don't care what you call it. It's semantics. I don't care if you call it DEI or, affirmative action. I could care less what the title
Hmm.
is. It's like all I care about is treating people the same and treating people equally. Um, but in this idea, about DEI or whatever you want to call it being good for business, how does that strike you? I mean, are you down with that? As well, it's good for business. Is that a good thing, or is that not a good thing?
Well, I mean, I think I kind of am neutral because I think an inclusive culture built on fairness and access to information, resources, and opportunities, where there is a diversity of perspectives, is good for business. So,
Hmm.
yes. But I think that when you couch too much in it's good for business, it's good for the bottom line, we forget the whole humanity part of it, right?
Hmm.
And we can end up creating exclusion because we can end up, you said earlier, like, making yourself small or trying to conform. What we
Hmm.
can end up doing is making cultures that are just driven by, productivity and profitability. And then we put people in there to kind of meet these metrics. Really what, to me, so, I mean, there's the business case and people ask about it all the time. And there's, there's business reasons to do this, but I also just, I don't know. And maybe I am an idealist in a lot of ways, but I'm just like, don't you want to work somewhere where it's fair and
Right.
considerate and kind and you got each other's backs? Like, I mean, I don't know. Like, it boggles my mind that we have to continue to make cases for work that everybody knows works. And I had put something on LinkedIn a few weeks ago, like this new survey, and it said something like 75% of leaders of companies that identify as conservative support DEI.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so I don't know. I don't even know why we're arguing about this anymore, because
Right.
because Elon Musk has money to throw away, and because we have like 2 billionaires who decide that they want to like have a propaganda machine against something. I mean, nothing's getting taken from them. They're the richest people on the planet. Like, I don't know
Right.
what else they want. Like,
It's
to your
almost like
point,
it's a pet project. It's like that.
it's a
Who's
pet
the
project.
kid's name? Miller, who's in the
Stephen
class.
Miller.
Stephen Miller. I mean, and he grew up in LA. Okay,
Mhm.
went to
Yeah.
Venice High School. But the idea that he's like on this rampage, to get rid of all things diversity and DEI is like, why? You know,
Mhm.
I just don't understand, you know, what the motive. I cannot for the life of me understand why you have these handful of people who are able to upset the
Mhm.
whole country like
Mhm.
this.
Mhm. Well, and I think I mean, honestly, that's why you have to build relationships. And I was on a podcast like last year, probably at this time, and I made an offer, and I'm genuinely serious. I made an offer to Governor Abbott. I was like, man, come on over to my house. Like, come sit with me. Let's talk about this in an honest way. Like, share a meal. Like, I'll let you meet my kids, and we'll sit down and we'll talk about this, because the way you're thinking is inaccurate, and that's not up for debate. And you can have views that are different than mine, we can have values that are different, but you're being dishonest in this conversation, and so come on over. And that's the thing, is that the people who are against these efforts, like, they're in it for a very personal motivation at the expense of all of us. And I think people see that, because I think what's going to happen, to circle kind of all the way back to this ruling in the Alabama Supreme Court, and really the Dobbs decision, is these decisions are going to hurt everybody.
Yeah.
They hurt me going to the doctor and trying to get my ovarian cyst looked at, right? They're going to hurt all these people in Alabama who just want to have a family, right? And who knows, like, the ramifications there are so many unforeseen consequences. So we need to hold people accountable. And I mean, I think there's so many issues to attack. My advice is also to find the things that you're not just passionate at, but that you can commit the time to. During 2020, a lot of people read a lot of books and they got like very activated, but they didn't do anything. They read the
Right.
books, they didn't change anything. And I'm an avid reader. I read a book a week at least, but take what you've learned and do something with it, right? And I think that's like the call to action, is that build your community, build relationships, have these hard conversations. Don't shy away from it. Tell your stories. Like, your podcast so important, because we have to hear people's stories. And, I don't think that people realize what's going on, in that you can't just go to the doctor anymore. At least, my practice, which is a huge practice in Austin and all over Texas, and just go get an ultrasound like I could for my entire life of
Right.
being a woman, right, from 14 on.
Right.
And that's going to create a huge amount of problems for people. And I am financially capable and able to, do things if I need to. But
Exactly.
most people can't do that. And we are going to have people die because, someone has an idea to push an agenda without thinking through how it's going to affect everyone. But you can take this all the way back to the 1500s, when someone had an idea of, hey, let's kidnap Africans and bring them across the sea and make them work for us and enslave them. It's the same
Exactly.
thing. Someone had an idea, and it's like, hey, this sounds great. We're having ideas, like, let's make fetus or embryos, people. Like, you have these ideas, and then we look back and we're like, what on earth were we doing?
Well,
So-
nobody's thinking about the unintended consequences, right? And
Yes.
they're also not thinking about how those consequences, like you said, are going to affect them. They only see it, well, that's other people. I'm going to benefit, not understanding that we're all connected in some way, right?
Mhm.
And it ultimately is going to come back on you. It's almost kind of like karma, right? It's gonna come back on you, and it's gonna hit hard. I mean, we are actually out of time, and I could listen to you like forever. I love your energy. I love your passion. I love your compassion and your empathy. Do you have, like, and you just talked about a call to action, which I think is a great place, to end. Do you have like one last, nugget or something that you'd like to share with folks to like motivate them or educate them or whatever? Give me a Mindy,
Yeah.
give me a closing Mindy.
Yeah, well, I'll put it to you this way, because this is a conversation I had with my son on the way to school today. So this is on my mind. He's 12,
Mhm.
and I've been telling my kids since they were little, whenever you learn something, whether it's history or science or whatever topic, always ask whose voice is not represented here. Who are we
Mm.
not hearing from?
Mhm.
And he's doing that right now on a project. And he said, Mom, I asked, whose perspective am I not hearing? And these are the micro choices you can make. And the reason I bring it to kids is because whether or not you have kids, you have an influence on kids. And a lot of the ships have sailed for certain people of certain ages. But if we can raise a generation of kids that are compassionate, that are invested, and that understand how important justice and racial justice and gender equity really are, like, that's a game changer, because you're not just changing your situation, you're changing, the entire community, country, world. And when we think about how things benefit us, I'd encourage everyone to kind of get away from that, because you're not the most important person in the world. You're important, but I think I think you have to look at a global perspective to really humble yourself enough to make those right choices every day. Because it'd be much easier to wake up in the morning and be like, I'm only going to be caring about me today.
Yeah.
I wake up in the morning and say, what can I do to care for the world around me? And it's not that difficult. I still have a lot of fun, right? I still enjoy my life. I still do, all the things that a normal person would enjoy, but I do it from a lens of, I want to leave this place better than I got here, than I arrived. And that was really what my grandparents, my mom, and my family really taught me, is that we have to be willing to put in the work to make this place better than when we left it. And I hope I can do that, at least with the people that I touch.
Well, you certainly have today. I love that. You certainly, and you definitely do. And that's why, from the very first time I met you, I thought, I could be friends with her. And so I'm glad you agreed to have this conversation. It's very timely. It was very honest, and I appreciate that. So thank you so much, Mindy, for being here to BS with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And thanks to everyone for listening. Until the next episode, remember that everybody is different, and different is good.
Hit it. That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
We hope you enjoyed the stories shared in today's episode of BS, Beyond Stereotypes. Join us next time when another authentic personality unleashes their uniqueness on the world.